Hello and welcome to the dark side. This is Tab the Purple with your other host, Mr. Storm, who for some reason has decided to take me off camera. Wonderful. I hope everyone can hear me still. What fun. You okay there? Is it because we're the way round? Would you like me to switch us back?
Yeah, do that.
Is that bothering you? Yes, normally I'm on this side. There you go. Simple switch.
Yeah, much better. Yep.
You feel better now?
Yep.
Change is your friend. Okay, so this evening's show is action-packed, of course. There has been a lot of news happening in this week. And the topic that we want to handle today is really about how in the 21st century, how right in this moment we process and deal with politics. Do we allow our politicians to rewrite history? And do we vote for them regardless because, well, or do we simply stop voting? Or what do we do? Like, we're going to talk about some really fundamental issues. But first, there is news. And so the first news story that I want to take on today is that Ben & Jerry's are suing their parent company Unilever to block the sale of their Israeli business. Now, this was a really interesting story for me because it is the intersection between Ben & Jerry's putting its money where its mouth is. It is a company that has a long record of being on the front lines of many issues and at least having really good statements. But I don't work for Ben & Jerry's, so I don't know how that works in practice. But this was one of these issues where I felt like I understood a little bit more about Ben & Jerry's identity as a company. I didn't know that they were owned, or I didn't remember they were actually owned by Unilever, which is, of course, an international company. This has allowed Ben & Jerry's to have more access to different markets, to be spread out all over the world, of course. Family business in the States gains so much traction. How does it do that? It does that by going into a bigger conglomerate. But it is set up in such a way that Ben & Jerry's itself holds a separate identity and amount of power from its parent company and always reserves the right to then challenge their work. And so the complaint has been filed in the U.S. District Court in Manhattan, and said the sale announced on the June 29th threatened to undermine the integrity of Ben & Jerry's brand. And Ben & Jerry's board have retained independence since 2000 when they were taken over. So what are they trying to stop? What they are saying is that they want to protect the brand and social integrity that Ben & Jerry's has spent decades building, and therefore they do not want to have the company selling on the West Bank. Now, for those of you that very quickly tie in anti-Semitism with standing opposed to political issues within the country of Israel, just take a deep breath, stay with us. There is a political war going on in that region. There is conflict. There are issues. And what Ben & Jerry's have said is it undermines their political integrity to be a part of that. They don't believe that serves the way that the company is and who they stand for. They believe that there is injustice there, and therefore they will not be selling ice cream within that region while there is conflict. They retain their integrity. I really wanted to bring this to your attention because I think it does matter that who we support as companies. I think it does matter where we put our money, and when companies make stands more than the people around them, and you have to question, if it's so important that Ben & Jerry's refuses to sell ice cream in the country, should I dig a little deeper and do research myself to understand why is my government supporting something that an ice cream company doesn't? Maybe, just maybe, this should make you think that it's not based in anti-Semitism, it's not based in these ideas, it is actually based in a political system, and that political system has problems within it and has issues and challenges. So, yeah, Mr. Storm, any thoughts?
Yeah, a few on this. Kudos to Ben & Jerry. If anyone conflates what Ben & Jerry's are doing with anti-Semitism, you might want to bleep the next part out because I'm about to tell people what they can do.
We'll move on.
Because there's a big difference between the two. And the UN has already declared that what is going on in Israel is tantamount to apartheid. So this isn't even a discussion.
It shouldn't be, yet it always is.
As for Ben and Jerry's, as I said, I take my hat off to them, and to be honest, it's not unexpected from them as a company. When you dig into them as a company, their board is reflective of their values. So when you start looking at the board makeup, so you have a lot of companies out there that give lip service and say, oh, we're interested in diversity and equality, and then you look at the boards and it's just a whole bunch of old white men. Ben and Jerry's board is actually diverse by race and gender. Quite probably sexuality too, but that's not a characteristic that you can determine just by looking at someone. So I can't comment on regards to diversity in that regards. But as for race and gender, the board is very diverse, and they put their money where their mouth is. This is the first time they've spoken up, boycotted things. When the Black Lives Matter was at its height about 2 years ago now, they put their money where their mouth was again, and protested. I can't remember if the founders were actually out in the streets protesting themselves. But as I said, it's not unexpected from them as a company based on what I've seen them do previously.
Yeah, and as I say, I think we have to question ourselves when we're so set in our opinions, and then an ice cream company, let's just say it plain, something that's quite indulgent luxury, something which is not your everyday nourishment meal, is actually making the strides, the statements, the putting themselves in almost political hot water to stand by their beliefs. And I think that's something that, the average person, you can take that seriously. You can look at that and say, what do they know that I don't know? What is it that they see that I don't see? When you work on these larger political scales, of course, you get to see different things. And I think maybe it's a wake-up call for us all to have a dig in, and maybe do a little bit more research and not just take things at face value, and have a look at what's happening on the West Bank, and if there are things that we can do that is actually viable and helpful. If there are ways of lobbying our governments to end the apartheid type system that is in place there. So that, I think, was a good first story.
Yeah, as I said, for anyone who's watching, listen, I prefer to spend money on Ben and Jerry's because it tastes better than a lot of other premium brands out there, but also because it's a committed trade. And what I find is a lot of these premium brands charge an exorbitant amount for their products, but they take it all in profit.
Yeah.
And so if I'm going to pay something for a premium, I'd rather know actually the premium is being invested to those further down the chain.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Which brings us to our next story nicely. Thank you for that introduction. Breaking news today is that Uber have broken laws, duped police, and secretly lobbied governments around the world. And this comes after 124,000 confidential documents were leaked to The Guardian. The BBC has picked it up and done a panorama investigation into it. It's all over the news today. If you have missed this, then either your news stations are not news stations, or the lobbying works, something like that, or you have real trouble in your country, as in Sri Lanka and other places which are really experiencing difficult times at the moment. What struck me about this is the fact that you're talking about new technology. These are normally quite small startups. They do gain traction very quickly. I mean, Uber now, you would say, is a large conglomerate that works across different country boundaries. But what's very fascinating about it is how it's being put forward and the ethics that are being promoted. Uber is not without an unethical history. There have been legal suits after legal suits that have dogged this company. They have been taken to court on working hours, pay, all sorts of issues. And yet still, Uber maintains its sort of dominance within the world market of taxi type companies, ride sharing in this case. And I think it's interesting that no matter what happens, our convenience in some ways is more important than the ethics of a company. And our governments are no better. Their pockets are more convenient than the ethics of actually ensuring that workers were paid fairly, that laws were kept in terms of holiday pay and, you know, sick leave and things like that that are really necessary for people to live. And you can still maintain the flexibility of your company while ensuring that your workers are, you know, have a decent standard of living and don't feel that they have to give up their life, so to speak, in order to make a living. And so Uber have done this according to these documents. It's been going for some time. It really does lay bare the kind of ethical dilemmas and questions that arise with new technology, and the fact that, you know, in order to keep up, because profit has become the god of everything, companies must make a profit or else they're not a company. And I'm not talking about break even, and I'm talking about profit now. So I'm not talking about you're not going to make money to pay yourself and your staff and do all of that. That's all within the break even. So let's make that clear. Profit is what you get extra. But because that extra has become the thing to aspire to, people do all sorts of evil things in the name of making a profit and keeping a company profitable. This is breaking news, so I can't tell you very many details about it because I haven't read any of the 124,000 documents yet. Give us time. I'm sure this will come up again. You know, Emmanuel Macron in France is in hot water because of it, because when he was a cabinet minister in technology, he was having dealings with Uber, and it seems that Uber were writing the law that he would then present. I don't know. It's an interesting one. I'm looking forward to kind of digging into it, but I do think it tickles me the wrong way because of the fact that I know that Uber, this is not going to be their first legal wranglings. This is not the first time their ethics have been called into question. You know, it won't be their last. Let's be honest. Mr. Storm.
Yeah, look, business as usual. I was distracted in doing other things because this is not something unheard of or unknown, especially in the US where they have super PACs and basically write laws and then give them to the politicians. You know, and this is just known how the government works. In terms of all of this being leaked, look, the reality is if you want to know how bad your political system is and how corrupt it is, ask yourself this question. Who's going to jail for this?
Well,
and it doesn't really matter what country it's in. Who's going to jail?
No one. No one. Company
Right?
doesn't even.
Country is irrelevant. The country is irrelevant.
No
Nobody
one
is going
goes
to
to
jail
jail.
over this.
No one is held accountable.
So for me, I'm just like, look, this is business as usual. And if people are willing to accept it, you know, and you see what people are willing to accept because they show you at the ballot box.
Which leads us on to a really interesting story, which will take us to our main story. So I think this is interesting because I think it shows the way that political parties interact with companies in some way. So basically, the IATA, which stands for the International Air Transport Association, the director, Willie Walsh, has come out and said flights are going to be more expensive. Full stop. Flights are going to be more expensive. People need to get used to this. The reasons that he cited that flights are going to be more expensive is that there is a rise in fuel costs due to the pandemic and then demand afterwards, and also because of the war in the Ukraine. Now, if you've watched our show before, we did a whole piece on the fact that overinflated prices of oil, where companies are saying that they're just printing money, basically, and they just have a ticket and they're just digging new oil fields every day, and how much exploitation is going into this particular field makes it laughable that even within these bodies which are supposed to be governed by something, the answers are still the same. You're blaming over consumption since the pandemic has ended, demand issues, plus the war, when the reality is the companies are making astronomical profits and are refusing to put the prices down, and no one says that. Okay, so that's number one. He also says that it's due to the fact that many airports themselves were unprepared and not ready for the post-COVID demand that they were going to face, and therefore this has led to higher costs because of things like staff shortages leading to higher wages, trying to attract staff, so on and so forth. Now, what's interesting is that the the people who run the airport, and Heathrow being, and Gatwick being one of them, have actually talked and said, no, this is not true. He's being, fatalistic. We're still going to be providing air travel. And I think this is where you have to actually look at facts and not the fiction of what people are saying. Can you distinguish between people trying to encourage you to spend your money with them rather than listening to what is actually being said and applying just some basic logic? We're all feeling the effects of the cost of living crisis that's happening globally, not just in one country, but globally. And it has led to governments being toppled. If we look at Sri Lanka, that was news this week and yesterday, that Sri Lanka's government has fallen. There are problems across the entire globe with the cost of living crisis. And are we concentrating on the things that governments should be doing to reduce the cost of living crisis? No. Instead, they're having an argument about whether we're going to pay more for our flights due to the increases in fuel costs and wages. And in doing that, it pits, of course, the employee against the customer. You are immediately bringing conflict because of you. It is paid. I'm not able to go on my cheap vacation to wherever. But bear in mind this. When it comes to these airlines, they don't pay fairly. It shocked me to learn during this pandemic that air staff, the hosts that work on our planes, the clock doesn't start running for them and they don't start getting paid until they are in the air. So all that time, they are helping you with your luggage, trying to get you in the plane, checking your tickets. Pilots and everyone are doing their job. They're not being paid for that time. And yet still we demand the highest of service, of course, from them. The companies demand the highest of service. And then when it comes down to paying the price, who gets the blame? Those same staff. It is an absolute not good. It's absolutely not a good situation. And I do think that it leads us to our main story, because it does talk to this. European Union leaders are getting together to talk about, how we're going to block Russia's fuel, which is going to drive the prices even higher. Bear in mind that we have just had wars end in which governments were going into Middle Eastern countries to try and secure oil fields. Okay, so let's not be short-sighted about this. Let's actually think about the context of what we're having and what's happening, and really try to evaluate for ourselves what is globally going on and how can I hold my government accountable? What things can I do in my local situation to actually get involved and sort these situations out? Mr. Storm.
Yeah, listen. Asian friend of mine had a saying when people were trying to take the rip: suck my chutties.
Oh dear. You see, this is where we're going. We're having one of those days today.
Oh, we're having one of those days, especially when it comes to this subject. Here's the thing. These airline companies are taking a real pee, right? How you telling me you want to charge me more when it has been my tax money that kept you afloat during COVID and lockdown? Hey, your prices should stay the same. This is called payback. I mean, think about it, right? We're going to come on to two nefarious and odious people in a minute, right? But one of them, hey, said in this cost of living crisis, guess what? The government's going to give you £200, but you got to pay it back.
Mm-hmm.
These airline companies need to start paying back some money, yeah? And don't even get me started on the banks either, right? Because I still haven't forgiven them for that.
Not
Yeah,
started.
so I'm like, look, these airline companies need to start paying back. But here's another question that I have. In fact, not even a question, it's an observation because I'm not asking questions to these people. I'm just saying it how it is. All of this mess you're talking about, air prices of travel are going to increase, right? Because of fuel increases. During COVID, fuel prices dropped. I didn't see airline prices dropping,
Oh, here we go. And isn't that the truth, right?
right? So if you're telling me they're going up because, hey, it's going to cost us more to do it, shouldn't the prices have dropped when it was costing you less,
Mm-hmm.
right? So for me, as I said, for me, I look at it and I'm like, they see the fuel companies holding people over a barrel, and they're
Mm.
like, you know what? Since the governments aren't doing anything about it, we're just going to go ahead and do the same.
Yeah.
And I expect other companies to start doing likewise. I mean, if you think that you're paying exorbitant fees or prices for your groceries, wait until the food producers get in on the act and just be like, well, you know what? Since people are saying, let's just increase prices, we're just going to increase prices. And there was
Mm.
a report that came out in the UK a couple of weeks ago that said 60% of the increases that you're seeing in prices for goods and services is solely down to profit for the companies. So
Mm-hmm.
understand what's happening. The companies do not have to raise the prices in the way in which they're doing.
Yep.
60% of it
Mm-hmm.
is solely to line their pockets and increase how much money they get. And the fact that people aren't in the streets rioting over this boggles the mind.
No,
Well,
I don't,
actually,
I don't think it boggles the mind. I think it's exhaustion. I think you have to bear in mind that people are literally exhausted. It's every day. The everyday average person is really suffering, and it's an everyday struggle to get out of bed, to keep doing what you're doing. And they're banking on that. They're banking on making you so tired. People are working 2, 3 jobs. People are really struggling to make ends meet. People are really suffering. And it's difficult enough to get through the day without then going, oh, yeah, there's
I
something I can do,
appreciate
I
that.
can
I
protest.
appreciate that. But here's the reality: you might be exhausted today, but you're going to be starving tomorrow.
Mm. Yes, the political system is not working. Which leads us to our main story. Remember, folks, if you have any comments, feedback, or questions, please do pop that into the comments section. We enjoy having your interactions. We enjoy the discussion. And I think it really helps us to have a productive evening if we can get some of the ideas that you would like to talk about within the narrative. And as such, we have a timely comment from Daniel, who says, I'm good with it. It pushes people to find alternatives. For travel, yes. I think that we do have to understand that it was not sustainable to be charging £10, euros, dollars for a flight. I think we have to understand what we're actually asking of the humans, the pilots, the staff, everybody involved with getting that flight in the air, because they were underpaying people. They were not, the people were not, it's not a livable, sustainable situation for many people to continue within the field. So they lost lots of employees based on the fact that that's not happening. But I think it does force, I don't think it was sustainable, but I do think that this idea that, they can continue to make the profits that they do is ridiculous. But you have said it's not specifically for travel, but is for everything else, unless you want to buy a boat.
Listen, I'm just going to say this, right? Who was it? Was it Gil Heron Scott? who had in the song "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised."
Yes, I don't know if it's them, but I do know the song "The Revolution Will
Right?
Not Be Televised."
Listen, the revolution is not going to be televised, but it sure as hell is going to be streamed. Right?
There
And
you go.
I'm like, if the system doesn't change, people are going to break it.
Yeah, I do think it will come to a head. I mean, you're beginning to see that around the globe, and you know, we just had a news story today where I've been following the news in Sri Lanka about the difficulties that they're having there, and obviously they've overthrown the incumbent prime minister, so on and so forth. It's not a story I want to cover today necessarily, because it's very deep and has a lot of different layers. But one of the critical points that was said time and time again, it was the cost of living crisis in Sri Lanka. The people had had enough. And what struck me is that they took over the palace, right? And all these people from villages around the country had, you know, swarmed into this palace, and people were lining up to go in to take pictures, to take things, to do all, you know, to hold this palace off from the wealthy. And one of the things that struck me is that people were saying, I'm living in a shack with my entire family in one room, and these people are living like this, and they're not investing in us. We can barely make ends meet, and they are living a lavish lifestyle. And I think that continued disconnect between politicians across the globe who do very well always, and the people that they are elected by is going to lead to conflict.
Listen, for me, I'm just like, people, they refuse to learn from history. The famous last words of Marie Antoinette, well, near famous last words that really done it, let them eat cake.
Well, there you go. You see?
The people were crying for bread, and she said, let them eat cake. So all of these people that are currently head of the system,
Yeah.
well, we all know the fate that befell Antoinette. Yeah.
Precisely. Which leads us to our main story today. So we're going to do something straight out of British politics. Before I move that, it's a repeat of the French Revolution. Well, it entirely is a repeat of that. But we want to look at British politics today. So I'm going to be mindful that not everyone who views this knows the history of British politics, or knows what we're even talking about, or has a good sense of it. So it is to say that we were a monarchy aristocratic system way back when, and that changed in the 20th century to a two-party system. And we have currently the two big parties are Conservatives and Labour, but that is not all the parties we have. Basically, the two-party system means there's those in power, and if you've ever watched the British political system, you'll see those in power sit on one side and those in the opposition sit on the other side, and you will have a mix of different political parties that sit on the sides depending on what the outcomes have been. And so we have Conservatives and Labour, and within the UK political landscape, the Conservatives, Tory party represent those who are more for business, etc., and the Labour, Lib Dem, those sorts of ones represent those who are interested in more of the people and come out of that aspect. So if you look at your own political system, you could find your affiliates, and it would be very similar, I think. Because we have the British system has different nations. Of course, we have the seat of government in the UK is in London, but we have Scotland, we have Northern Ireland, and we have Wales, and each one of those has its own devolved power, and so they have the laws that govern the entire nations, but they also have devolved power in those places, and they have elections, and they all sit within the parliament within the UK. So that's a little bit of a history so that you understand what we're talking about, because what we're going to talk about really, and what I want to look into today, or the question that I have is, can we hold our memories? Can we actually engage in politics, particularly from a faith background, but from any background? Can we engage in politics in a more strategic way than we're currently doing? Because if you follow the news, you would hear some really different opinions depending on which way the wind is blowing. So currently, we talked about this last time, the head of the BBC, which is our national news organisation in the UK, is currently a Conservative. appointment and has a very conservative leaning. You hear that every day. Why do I know this? So let's take the former Prime Minister. So at the moment, we've just lost Boris Johnson, or we are in the process of getting rid of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, and someone will take over. And now there will be a political race to see who that person is. But the media has a very short-term memory of how things have gone before and report with a very distinct slant. Lost, I know it was a bad word, losing, process of getting rid of. I don't know how you want to say it. He quit ish, not really. Should there be a crisis over the summer, I don't think you're getting rid of him. Anyway, so Theresa May was the previous Prime Minister to Boris Johnson. And if you heard how they described her, and I was talking to my son about this, all it was she can't control anybody. She's not good at what she's doing. Oh my goodness. Look at this woman. She's so ineffective. One stumbling mess after another. Her backbenchers are in uproar. Now, Boris Johnson has had some of the worst defeats in terms of his backbenchers revolting, in terms of how his tenure has gone, worse than May. But if you compared the media stories, you would have thought May really did, and I am not a fan of her, don't get me wrong, but I say it because I think it's important to understand the landscape within which we're working. The media will portray what it wants you to hear in that moment, and it will not give you a wider lens of what this party has done, is doing, or has achieved. So I want to go through some bits and pieces just to make you smile. The outgoing Prime Minister of the UK is Boris Johnson. And Boris Johnson's career reads like not a very nice career. He has more failings than you could imagine. So he's in Parliament for some time as in Henley. He goes on to serve as the London Mayor, and he oversees actually the 2012 Olympics. But arguably, the committee oversaw the 2012 Olympics, and he didn't do very much. But anyway, that's just me. It was actually the previous mayor who won the vote for that, but we'll just let that go. He begins as a co-leader for the campaign to take Britain out of the EU. He's in opposition in his own party to the then Prime Minister, David Cameron. He literally spearheads some of the worst slanderous, lying, I mean, the buses that were put up with this guy's permission, were just ridiculous. The advertising campaign was found to be illegal. It broke laws. It had lied. I mean, everything about the campaign that he ran was false, and yet somehow we still ended up with Brexit. And David Cameron steps down. When David Cameron steps down, he serves as the Foreign Secretary under Theresa May. And if you all would remember, if you look up some news stories for him as Foreign Secretary, you will see blunder, failing, mistake, unprepared, didn't know what he was doing, never got it together that Boris Johnson did. But somehow, even though Theresa May had managed to strike a deal with the EU, which kept them closer in, somehow Boris Johnson manages to lead a campaign to get her out, and he becomes the party leader, which effectively makes him Prime Minister. He's then takes it to... he announces that basically he will shut down Parliament in October, giving the opponents less time to basically throw out this idea of a no-deal Brexit. So imagine you're in a situation where you had a deal, the deal was a good deal, and the opposing party switched to a leader who decides to close down Parliament so that should he need to have a no-deal situation with the EU, he could just wave that through. And I think that people... outside of the UK will not understand the magnitude of having a no deal with the UK. Is an island. It doesn't have anyone to help it. There's no, if you don't grow it on your island, you have to import this stuff. It could literally grind the country to a halt. Businesses would collapse overnight if you had a no deal, because how would you maintain all of those ties and working relationships that you've had and businesses that have spread out? I mean, anyway, so he goes on to have mistake after mistake after mistake. And they go, it just completely goes on. if I tell you the list, you'd be horrified. But it goes on and on and on. I'm mindful of time, and I want to get Mr. Storm in on this issue. So what really strikes me is now that he's leaving, everyone is holding up as his. But he did what he said he was going to do. He took Britain out of the EU. Brexit is done. How is Brexit done when you're about to go into a legal war over Northern Ireland? The deal that you are renouncing, backtracking on the deal that you made is putting you in the direct legal crosshairs and breaking international law according to Europe. How have you done it? You can't do it if it's not done. It's not finished. You haven't done the job. There's no satisfactory still point where I can look at it and say, yes, he has done Brexit. Everything is done. Other than the fact that, of course, officially Britain isn't in the EU, but Brexit by far is not over. There are still so many legal issues that have not been resolved. Yet his history and legacy is really being told as if he achieved this great feat of Brexit. Which leads us to our next point. The Conservative Party will need a new leader, and that leader will be appointed as Prime Minister. When this happened once before in living memory, when we had Blair and then it went to Brown, the opposition screamed loudly about how this was an illegitimate prime minister, and screamed, the Conservatives, they did, at the top of their lungs to any media outlet that they could find, that this was illegitimate. And yet we're going to have this very scenario happening with Boris and whoever his successor will be. And guess what? They want us to believe that this is perfectly normal, allowed, and should not affect us in any way, shape, or form, despite the fact having Boris Johnson himself opposed his own leadership within his own party twice in order to become Prime Minister. So your party is not stable, but there will be a leadership debate. And two of the big contenders for that leadership debate are going to be Javid and
Sajid Javid and Rishi Sunak.
Okay, thank you. And because
I just want to inject. I think it's not just those two. I think the only Conservative or the only Tory party member that isn't running for leadership of the Tory party is Keir Starmer.
Okay, so people won't understand that joke. Keir Starmer is the leader of the opposition. He's the leader of Labour. So
Allegedly.
He's not running. And this is always a contention with it. Oh, listen, let's not get distracted. But we have these two people who, there are currently 9 people in the race. But the reason I bring up these two specifically is because they were the tipping point of the end of the Prime Minister's reign, so to speak. And I don't know whether they were the tipping point, but basically they resigned from their posts, and those 2 resignations and the letters that they wrote, which were really great letters, very magnificent pieces of writing. If you've got any interest in reading them, really great. Except for the fact that in them, they talked about having integrity, not wanting to support a leader who does not have the will of the party, does not have the will of the country in its best interest. But you've been serving under him for how many years now? And you've been supporting his policies for how many years now? What integrity? When it came to Partygate, in fact, he had a leadership challenge. They were going to try and oust him. And these two same people were like, no, it's okay. It'll be all right. So what was the straw that broke the camel's back? The straw that broke the camel's back was one of the appointed leaders of Johnson was arrested for...
Investigated,
thank you. Investigated for abuse charges. This was the tipping point. This is the straw that broke the camel's back. Of all the things, apparently, this is the one that got everybody. And I'm glad, because, we shouldn't condone abuse, but it wasn't the same when it was other Conservative Party members who were abusing. Those weren't the straws that broke the camel's back.
It was that Johnson promoted him whilst being aware of these sexual abuse allegations. Right. So, but I don't even believe it was that. But here's the funny thing: all these male politicians are out here saying, "Oh, this is the straw that broke the camel's back," right?
Mhm.
And once again, I just want to point out how self-serving it is,
Oh yeah.
right? Because there's been Tory politicians recently that are up on rape charges.
Yep.
Okay. Difference is that they were raping and abusing women and children, because there's the one that just went to jail
Mhm.
for what he did to children, right?
Mhm.
The difference now is that Pincher was sexually abusing men. And so all these men didn't want to be the targets of abuse. And that's essentially what they're saying brought Johnson down. And even so, I don't actually believe it was that. I believe it was the recent by elections in Tiverton and Honiton.
And we covered those on the last episode, and I think I'm going to have to agree with you because it's about power. It isn't about. I'd like to believe, I would hope to believe that it's about abuse, of course, because that would be such a wonderful message to send to all the victims of abuse that we don't stand for abuse. This is not a country that abides that sort of abuse. The
Yes.
reality is they were about to lose power. Everything after the elections, the by elections, which are our local elections in the UK, said to them that they will be out and lose power. If they continue the way with Boris Johnson, they are losing points, they're losing seats, and they're making great defeats. Which leads us to the point of how do we engage in politics, I think, and what should we be looking out for now that we're going to have a leadership election, which we don't have a say in, of course. I don't have a say in who is elected as the leader of their party. I'm not a signed up member. I don't vote for that leader. That leader is elected by Conservative party members. That's their job. But I do get a vote when it comes to the election, and we hope that there'll be elections fairly soon for the party. What should I be looking out for? What should I remember? Because currently Sunak and Javid are being hailed as in the keepers of integrity, the ones that have a moral standing. You know, they've been a compass. But if I look at their policies, if I look at the news reports over the last 2 years while they have been serving, it really doesn't read the same way. If I look at what they've actually done and achieved, the things that are being said don't match what they're actually doing. And how do we stop this kind of short-term amnesia is the question that I have for you, Mr. Storm.
Well, I think you need to keep calling out what their shortcomings and failings are and what their policies are. So I actually have a list of some of their failings, right? But just in regards to Boris and the idea that anything that he does would be of a balm to victims of sexual abuse. Listen, nothing Boris does is going to be anything but self-serving, right? He does not care, which is why Chris Pincher was promoted to the position he was, despite Boris being told about the abuse.
Yeah, but this goes back to, I mean, my point was about the wider political party. You know, did you stand against him because he was promoting abusers, or did you stand against him because you thought you were going to
No,
lose the next general election?
they,
And I think the
they
truth is,
yeah,
it's the general election.
yeah.
I would hope it was the abuse, because I would hope that people would be sending a message saying, we do not tolerate abusers. I know that not to be true because every other abuser in the Conservative Party ended up convicted before they lost their seats, convicted before their membership was called into question. You end up
Well,
in jail before you can get your membership quashed.
the point I'm trying to make, okay, is yes, as I said, I already stated that it was due to the by-elections, in my opinion. But the point I'm trying to make is there are those out there that try to cling on to some vestige of hope in or some idea that Boris is redeemable. He's not, right? Boris is alleged to have said when he heard about the sexual abuse allegations. Pincher by name, pincher by nature. Right? He was asked about this at I forgot what the name of the committee was, and he didn't answer the question. Right?
That's weird.
So I think we need to just recognize that that is the character of the person that we're dealing with. And
Mm.
look, here's the thing. I mean, Boris has never married a woman that he hasn't cheated on yet,
Oh,
right?
oh,
So if you're looking for integrity from this guy, it's not going to happen. I mean, he's had what, 4 or 5 bites at the cherry and hasn't managed it yet.
no, no, absolutely. And I think that's something that we've got to remember, that he, when we look at his timeline of history, he has more failures under his belt, which, I mean, you know, in some ways that's normal to have failures before you win and stuff like that. Life lessons and all of that. Keep going. But in his case, his failures are catastrophic in
No,
that he's lying. That's why
but,
he
but I
failed.
think the difference is, and I think you talk about failures, and you're right, people will have failures, but these are failures of character. There's a difference between failures and failures of character. And at every stage, Boris has failed in character.
And
Right?
that's the point that's the point I'm making. It's like,
But
yeah, dust yourself off and try again, except if you're Boris Johnson, because you're not. What are you dusting yourself off from? Lying? Stop lying. What are you dusting yourself up from? Manipulating the British people. I mean, there's been questions over the funds he's taken. There's obviously Partygate, which we've had recently. He's advocating backing out of laws that will cause Britain to have real serious problems in the international market, so on and so forth. And so I think, the one that really got me is, the BBC were out interviewing people. What do you think of Boris Johnson's finally stepping down, blah, blah, blah. And this guy goes, I voted for Boris Johnson. And so the reporter said, well, he didn't do this and he hasn't done this and he's been caught with this and he's broken this rule. Just personally, he's done really bad things. And he went, yeah, that's exactly what I voted for. And I thought to myself, what are you talking about? How is this normal? How is it? How are we? What are we doing? How does this normalize? That we are literally knowing, just like with Trump, just like with other leaders across, Europe and other countries, we know that they're lying. We know the bad things that we're doing, but we're voting for them because what about our value system backs this position? And then I really have to call into question white supremacy in the European case, because I'm like, I can't see another reason. You're going against him for what other reason? But anyway, that's a different conversation for another matter.
yeah, I think it was Dave Chappelle, I could be wrong, who said
Who does
crack.
Boris be cheating with? The next wife. So just to be clear, so basically Boris is 5 times in his relationships and he cheats on one wife with the next wife. That's effectively what happens. It's a miracle he gets so many women. There must be something about power that's going to his
No,
head.
I think there was one he didn't marry. The
Or was
one
there one?
who he forced or persuaded to have the abortion. He promised he would
Oh,
and didn't.
right, there was her.
So
The
that's
next
one.
wife's bar one, or that we know of. Because if
Yeah.
he's cheated 6 times,
Anyway,
likely to do it again, isn't it?
Anyway, we are meant to be focusing on Sunak and Javid,
Yes,
who
please. Sorry.
the media have been holding up as some bastions of integrity, and morals and ethics. They have some moral fiber because they stood up to Johnson and they resigned. And essentially, this is what they're alleging brought Johnson down from power. Well, let's start with Rishi Sunak. He was Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Mm-hmm.
And for those that don't understand what that means, it is one of the 3 offices of power, the main offices of power in the UK. Some might say 4 if you include Prime Minister as well in that. but he is responsible for budgets, the financial running of the country. So, war breaks out between Russia and Ukraine, and there's this whole push from a lot of Western countries to say to companies, you need to divest from Russia. You need to divest from Russia, Russian companies. You need to do all of these things. And you even had like big companies like Shell sell off shares in what is it, Rosneft, the
Same
Russian
thing.
national oil company, or
Hmm.
or was it Gazprom? Anyway, it was one of them. Whilst Sunak is telling British companies this, his wife is heavily invested in a company called Infosys that operates out of Russia. And when people started to point out all this hypocrisy, Sunak says, and I quote, he should have gone all Will Smith on people that were criticizing his wife.
Excuse me?
Now, listen, Sunak is nothing but the width of half a twig. So I don't know who he's slapping and not breaking a wrist on.
But why is that a thing?
I don't know. Listen, the only thing Sunak could slap anyone with is those ears. Now, those ears would do serious damage.
Listen, you are a politician in the public eye. Your financial records are supposed to be public knowledge, and they're supposed to be investigated to ensure that you're clear. When your family is also under scrutiny, that's just part of political life, right? That's just normal. We look at the integrity of the person who's standing in front of us, and we check that you're doing all of those things. Whether they do it properly or not, different matter. You're going to go, firstly, why is going Will Smith a thing? Take that out of your mouth. That is not vocabulary we should be using. Sorry, but no. That's number one. Number two, defending your wife. What are you talking about? If she's doing the thing, you're not being told that she's ugly. You're being told that her companies are investing in Russia when they shouldn't be. Like, what are you talking about? Like,
Well, it was a hypocrisy. It was a
it's the
hypocrisy of him
hypocrisy of it,
telling.
right? It's like you're out here telling other people that they've got to divest while you're living on the profits of the same thing. Like, what are you talking about? So this is it. This is straight hypocrisy. Again, take Will Smith's name out of your mouth. Move on. That's not a thing. We don't say that. And your wife is not under personal attack. There's nothing. You are being called out for living on the profits of Russia. Mind your mouth.
Well, I think also there was there's also the fact, actually I didn't have this in my list, but it's just come to mind, is that his wife, who is worth hundreds of millions,
Yeah, she's rich.
had a non-domicile status, which means she wasn't paying tax in the UK.
Yeah.
And to
Do
be
you remember that?
non-domicile is to say that you don't live there.
Yes,
Well,
do you
your
remember that?
husband living there, so unless you'll be separated, or whatever, you're
Yes.
living in the UK. So, and as Chancellor of the Exchequer, you're in charge, or partly in charge, of making sure taxes are collected and all the rest of it. And your wife is literally robbing the system of millions, right? But guess what? Them benefit cheats,
Those are the bad people.
right?
Those ones. The ones that get, a couple of pounds a week. Those ones.
Yeah, those ones.
Those ones, yeah.
So that's one thing in which I think history needs to hold Sunak accountable for. The next thing is that under this cost of living crisis, right? Due to his policies, 1.3 million people are going to be pushed into absolute poverty. Now, understand this. I'm not saying poverty. I'm saying absolute poverty.
Yep.
Now, he is aware of this and chose to go ahead with these policies anyway. Right? And I think, once again, this is something that societies have to hold him accountable for. And when it comes to being, if he is elected, and then the general elections come around, people need to remember these things. People need to hold on to these memories, and you need to remove these people.
Yeah, absolutely. I almost advocate for and I don't say this lightly, but I think that we need to develop as individuals so that we can collectively make better decisions, like a political notebook, as you will. On your phone, a literal notebook, some kind of way of systematizing the information that you're being told in between elections, right? And I think this applies for every country. So while you're sitting in your living room and you're going about your daily business and you think, they've announced another change. Which one was it, and what's the change? Is this something that benefits my cause? Do I agree with this? Do I not agree with this? What is it? Note it down, because there will come a time when you're asked to vote for a political party, and most people seem to vote on their the tower that they've been built in. Like, I'm in this camp, so I vote this way, and I'm in that camp, so I vote that way. Instead of going, if I look at the list, this party has done nothing that I want. Nothing. They've not done anything to improve the situation. I need to vote differently come the next election. I need to actually have integrity about how I'm voting. And that's important because we run the world on a different political system than we used to. Now we have votes. Now the democracy is like a thing. Please, you guys are going to need to develop a system to cope with what you're being told in between elections.
Right. So just going to stick on the concept of poverty and making people poorer.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that he was lauded for during COVID was the fact that he initiated the furlough scheme in the UK. And I'm going to say in the UK because there were plenty of other countries that had it in place long before the UK did.
Yep.
But what people ignore is that a large amount of people that were self-employed were not included in this furlough scheme, right? So that is equal to about 3 million people.
Woo.
Right? So 3 million people are left struggling to get through the pandemic without a source of income. Once again, he is fully aware of these things. He is fully aware of these problems. And in fact, just a thought on this is actually, of those 3 million people and the pandemic, one of the things, and this is just a thought that came to me, actually, that would have been ideologically driven. And I say that because think of a sector that the Tories hate, absolutely hate, that is largely self-employed.
No, I'm sorry. Now you've asked me a question that's well and truly out of my range of knowledge.
The art sector.
Oh.
And for decades, the Tories have led policies in defunding the arts.
That's true. Yeah.
Why would they do that? Because the biggest critics of politicians are artists.
Of course. Yes, of course. Duh. I know this, don't I? I should know this.
Right.
I come from a family full of artists.
So essentially, they starve the artists to avoid criticism.
Which only brings more criticism because, of course, you're starving the artists. You're using your political weight against the people.
Well, once again, for me, and it segues nicely onto another way in which I believe they manipulated the system, legally manipulated the system to advance their own political ends. So we all know that the Tories promised not to raise national insurance. What did they go and do?
Raise national insurance.
Right. Now, here's the thing. Who pays national insurance?
Working people.
And who doesn't pay national insurance?
Big businesses.
No.
Well,
Older people, pensioners.
Yeah, true.
Now, they said that the rise in national insurance was to pay for social care. Who
Very social.
typically doesn't need social care?
Young people,
And who typically needs social care?
older people,
Right. Now, younger people and working class people or working people tend to typically vote what?
Labour, Lib Dem,
And older retired people typically tend to vote.
Conservative, otherwise known as the Tories for those who are watching.
So essentially, bribery.
Yeah, interesting.
It's a legal form of bribery.
Legal form. Make the pensioners comfortable so that they will vote for us, while simultaneously making the entire working population turn against you. It's a very interesting formula.
Right.
It's very
But
interesting.
the other point to bring out actually is that who is also the higher voting demographic?
It is the elderly people. Yeah, the younger ones don't vote as much.
Well, when you're working 3 jobs just to make ends meet, you ain't got time to go out to the
You've got
polling
time.
station queue.
Yeah,
Who's got time for that?
indeed.
Right.
Low voting turnouts, and also I think there's a legacy behind this, because there have been waves of where younger people have voted, and they vote in their droves. And we had this with the 2-3 elections ago, when it was the Lib Dem Conservative Party who had a coalition, and massive waves of people voted, young people voted, and they voted Lib Dem specifically because of the Lib Dems' promises regarding education, which when they got into power with the Conservatives, they broke, which then, of course, then turns the minds of the people who voted for you, because why would I vote? Why am I voting if you're going to do the opposite of what I've asked you to do? I literally vote for you on the basis of your platform. And when you get into power, you do a complete 180 and you do not do what it is, and you raise the cost of education for students and debt.
Yep.
I'm not going to back you again. So we've had these waves of where, and then you get this disillusioned period, which I think is what we're in now, where people feel like, well, I'm going to vote because what
Right.
reason?
So, as we said, the Tories promised not to raise taxes, increase national insurance taxes, right? But they actually did raise the taxes on people.
Mm-hmm.
And so the British public are carrying the highest tax burden in almost 100 years.
Yep.
Whilst going through a cost of living crisis that has seen real terms income decrease by its largest since the 1950s.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is the only major economy to increase taxes on its people during this cost of living crisis.
And this was a contention between Sunak and Johnson. You know, this was a heavily contended issue between the two of them. They fought this out, and it was public knowledge that they disagreed with each other on the choices over this tax thing, over increasing the taxes or increasing spending, etc.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. Boris was opposed to the tax increases because he needed to buy some good political will from the public.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Sunak needed the tax increases, and I'm about to explain why.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so you have the National Institute for Economic and Social Research, right, in the UK. And what they have recently said is that Sunak overpaid on the British debt, the interest on the British debt, by 11 billion.
11 billion? What do you mean?
Because he failed to insure against interest rate increases. Right? Now, you spoke about the media and politicians earlier on and how the portrayal of May compared to Johnson was, right? And just to show you how bad it gets, those that aren't from the UK won't know what I'm about to talk about. But Gordon Brown, I don't know if you remember, he sold off the UK, part of the UK's gold reserves, right? And he got slated for it because he sold it when the gold price was low. And it was estimated that he lost anywhere between $2 to 7 billion.
Whew.
Right? Between 2 billion and 7 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Right? All over the media, all over the papers.
Mm-hmm.
Sunak has just cost the
Mm-hmm.
taxpayer 11 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So even at its highest estimate, or even at a conservative difference, we're talking about 5 million, 4 million. Sorry, 5 billion. No, 4 billion.
4 billion difference. Billion difference. Yeah.
A conservative difference of 4 billion more.
Mm-hmm.
All the way up to possibly 9 billion more
Mm-hmm.
than Gordon Brown's gaffe.
Mm-hmm.
And it's absent from the media.
Yeah, I think we have to remember that media companies are businesses and they will portray what is in their best interest. Now,
Absolutely.
News is can be journalistic, it can have the integrity of journalism and so on and so forth. But the reality is that outlet has no such integrity. What makes it to your news broadcast is solely done on business frameworks, not on what's newsworthy. And I think that's something that we have to bear in mind. What you're seeing in the media is reflective of the business practices of the organizations. So whichever news outlet you're looking at, remember that this is a business. They're trying to make money. They're not doing it for fun. They're doing it because they want profit.
Yeah. I'm just simply, once again, reinforcing the point you made about how in bed media companies are with politicians.
Yeah.
Right? Because this is front page worthy news for days.
Mm. Oh, yeah. Oh, you could make this work for ages, especially with the fact that he's thrown his hat in the ring as a contender for the prime minister role.
Right. So, on top of this, he was fined over Partygate. So, whilst the conservative government is telling people, hey, no social gatherings,
Mm-hmm.
he's there partying with his colleagues. So, he
Alongside
actually
Johnson.
received a fine over this.
Yeah.
Okay. So, of course, people are unable to say goodbye to their loved ones that are dying with COVID, and the people that are making the rules are simply ignoring or flaunting the rules.
Yeah.
And once again, I think people, when it comes time to vote, you need to remember these things. Don't let people rewrite history. Don't let people say, "Oh, he implemented furlough." Yeah, he implemented furlough and left 3 million out because it was politically expedient for him to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah, he implemented furlough, and he also said you couldn't go see your dying loved ones while he was partying.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I think perhaps the most damning nail in the coffin is one that you have already said, and that is that he propped up and supported Boris Johnson in his premiership at every which way and turn
Mm-hmm.
until it wasn't politically advantageous for him to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Because he still would have been there had it been politically advantageous for him to do so.
Oh, absolutely. If they thought they were going to win the next election, there's no way we would be here discussing this right now in this context. Discussing it, yes, but not in this context.
Oh, and you know what I've just realized? Right? I've just realized people are probably going to say, or some people are going to say, why are we picking on the two Asian men in government?
Oh, yes, of course. Well, because we did give the reason. The reason was that the big tipping point came with, and as I said, their letters were on point. They resigned very publicly and dramatically from office with the latest scandal that Johnson went through. It was very dramatic, and it led then to 29, was it last count? I can't remember what the last count was, but the point I stopped counting, it was about 29 leaders.
Resignations.
resignations that they had received. I mean, that is and they recorded the highest resignation rate in any prime minister's history. I mean, this man failed spectacularly.
Yeah. But my point is more so that people are going to be like, oh, you're being racist. That's why you're picking on the two Asians. So
the reason is very clear. It's not about their ethnicity. In this case, it's about their ethics that they called into question.
Listen, as I said, I don't care what people say. I'm just letting you know, be aware for these things, right? So anyway.
Well, we're not going to do all of them. So I'm going to have to reel you in a bit because it's 10 minutes past. We've only done one person in the political landscape.
I'm about to go on to Javed now. Sajid Javed now.
Well, it's 1 hour, 10 minutes.
Yeah. I'll be quick.
All right.
I don't know how I'm going to be quick because this dude is an odious little man. I mean, really and truly, I have no love for this guy. I mean, none.
Yes.
I don't have.
You have the same amount of love you have for him as you have for Priti Patel.
Yeah. Do you know what? He probably is the male version of Priti Patel.
There you go. Right. So I think I'm going to reel you in on this now because we are 1 hour and 10 minutes in. And I think that people will understand that, or what the point of what we were trying to do here today is that we don't want people to look at the rewriting of history. That's the point, the big point that you're making. People are putting forward the point that all of these politicians, and there will be 9 of them that will be currently standing for leader of the Conservative Party, their records, their reports, the things that they've actually achieved are not glowing with stars and sparkles. Their integrity is in question, even though they're saying they're people of integrity and they could no longer do this or they could no longer do that. And the media is rewriting their history, is promoting them and making them seem as if these are the best options for a party, where your point, I think, which is clearly made, is don't allow your media outlets to rewrite history.
Yeah, listen, I wasn't joking. I think it was either last week or the week before where I said it appears you have to be a crook or a criminal or a liar or a fraudster or something to get into into leadership in this current Tory government. And I'm like, I'm not sure if Grant Shapps has thrown his hat into the ring yet. But I could pretty much go through most of the cabinet and give you a list of unethical, immoral, and at least at least borderline illegal and criminal activities that they've done. Yeah. And I am pretty sure that some of them probably do cross into actual criminality, but such is the corruption of the political systems that they're getting away with it.
Well, of course, but the thing is that the leader of the party is a criminal because he got fined for criminal actions. The other members are criminals. Like these are criminal actions. They weren't just the police investigated, found you guilty, and gave you a fine. Like you're engaging in criminal behavior, and that's just on Partygate. That's not on all your other ethics, of course. But I think it's important, and the reason we're bringing it up, of course, is because British politics now will be alight for a very long time. But one of the commonalities here is universal. If you're watching this and you're thinking, wow, British politics is really, woo, listen to them. They could talk for hours on British politics and how bad it is, and look at all that unethical behavior. The truth is that if you're thinking that, you're probably really not examining your own governments and your own political parties. Every country has media outlets, for-profit outlets, dictating the news that is provided to the country. And thereby, the history that you're being told, the things that you're being told are guided not by what is actually being done, but by a need for profit. And the point that Mr. Storm is very eloquently making is, when you're hearing the news stories and they're saying, look at this person of integrity, look how well they did, you need to have a running record of what they actually did. You need to keep something so that you don't allow them to just rewrite their history as glowing, but actually holds them accountable for their behavior by voting elsewhere. by actually taking your vote and putting it somewhere else for another political party, another political candidate, somebody who's standing in that will have a better ethic and moral guiding.
And I just want to make another point, actually, because I think this is in fact, it could even be a whole subject for Darkside. How you vote at the ballot box is becoming even more important, and this is globally, where you have the ability to do so, because globally, governments around the world are restricting the rights and access for people to demonstrate.
Yeah.
Right. The UK has passed some draconian laws. The Tory government have passed draconian laws. Just in the past couple of days, Arizona, the state of Arizona in the US, passed a law that you cannot film a police officer within 8 feet of them. So in essence, what that does mean is that when police officers are arresting you, you cannot film that interaction. And that returns it to a case of he said, she said. Right? And of course, who do people tend to believe? The police. Videos have shown how often the police are lying, but now they're trying to restrict your ability to film the police. Right? Texas passed, I think last year, a lot of laws restricting the ability of people to protest. And pretty much, well, no, they passed laws where, like, I believe it was Texas or Florida. It's one of those two hellhole states. But they passed laws saying that, people that get upset with protesters and drive their cars into the protesters can get away with, get away with it. Somebody dies.
Manslaughter?
No, you're free. You're free to go. So, it's all of this stuff going on, and as I said, it's not just the U.S. I believe Canada passed laws restricting protest rights, and it's going on through all the European countries. It's going on through all the Western nations, and actually, here's the thing: Western nations do a very good job of pointing to countries that are south of the equator, saying, "Look at those countries." Look at those countries, whilst at the same time doing the same or worse.
Yeah.
So
I
how
think
you vote is critically important, because you may not get the opportunity to voice your displeasure at the government that comes in.
And I think that's important to note, because there's lots of people are like, oh, well, it doesn't matter, or whichever way, they're corrupt both sides. We've talked about that as a trope before here on the dark side. All of those things. The reality is, if you care for the community that you live in, if you care about the lives of the people around you and yourself, you have to vote. Politics is not a separate entity of things that are magical and mystical. Politics literally governs the laws, the rights, and everything about our daily life. How we get water, which companies are allowed to, things, the right to protest we've just spoken about. All of those things are about your daily life, and if you're not voting, are you really taking seriously the mandate that we have to actually live in a community and work together? It has to be that way. Like, you have to take an active role in the way that your country is governed. And in countries like the US and the UK, who we're speaking about, France, we've spoken about today, that means going to the ballots and voting, and maybe making difficult choices to vote against something that you maybe agree with on one point. I may agree with this party on one point, but because I don't on 20, I'm going to vote somewhere else, no matter how important that one point is.
Well, just to go back to it, because I know you want to wrap up, this is essentially what happened in Tiverton in the by-election that we spoke about. Tiverton had been a traditional Tory seat for 20-something years, right? And the Tories lost that seat, and it was done with a 40-something point swing. because what happened was Labour voters looked at that and said, the only way to get the Tories out of here is to vote Lib Dem. And the Lib Dems are better than the Tories. And so we have to pick the lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
Right? And I think, Martin Luther King said that the pendulum of justice swings the pendulum of justice swings to anyway, basically the pendulum of justice swings in the right direction. And I think it's by making decisions like that we incrementally increase or improve the direction in which society heads.
I think there are important choices, and I know that we've taken you over time today, but I think it was important to raise this issue because we are literally in real time seeing the rewriting of history. Boris's legacy is one that has done blah, 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 blah. Well, but has he really? Think about it, like actually examine it. This new candidate's legacy is that they have done this, da, 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 da. But have they really? Actually look at the news stories. Just go back and have a look at the myriad of news stories about the person. What has actually been the predominant things over the years? What have they achieved? Does this actually match the values that I would like for my community? And not the color of their skin and not the sway of whatever it is. It is about the politics of what is happening. And I think that's really, it's a real issue and it's a real problem that we have to thank you we have to really examine and look at. And if you look at the politics of, we can all do this because the USA is such a enormous force in the world for better or worse, and I've spoken about how much I disagree with that. But if you look at the pendulum that swings out in the USA and how these things are done there, you can almost look back on your own government and think, how much alike are we? What policies are we enacting that are going to take us to that condition? How aligned are we with that political ideology that means that people don't have healthcare, people don't have social systems to go back to, there's no clean water, there are people who live in absolute poverty, the wealth gap is enormous. How is our country doing on those metrics? What political parties are standing for that type of metric? Don't vote that way. And I think we've given you the British overview, which I think is an important one because of the colonial history and the way that it runs itself and busies itself around the world doing things it shouldn't be. But I think it's more important for you to understand as a human being living on this planet, whichever country you reside in, you need to examine the politics of what's going on around you, because it is those politics that govern your standard of living. The cost of living crisis is worldwide because we're all connected to these political people who are not holding some of these companies accountable.
Yeah. Look, I think we need to recognize that it's time to stop demonizing poor people and point the responsibility to where it lies. It's often said poor people shouldn't have children. Well, here's the thing. Rich countries shouldn't have poor people.
He said what he said. So, on that note, I think that really is the dark side. Rich countries shouldn't have poor people. Amen. Right. So, on that note, thank you very much for joining us on the dark side. I hope this has inspired you to actually think seriously about how you engage politically and what you actually do, and to take a look at how you vote, if you vote, and how you vote. Of course, we would say not if, but how. No matter how difficult that is, it is worth doing. And bear in mind that the reason that they make it difficult for you to vote is because they really want to get away with being very bad and doing things that are not in your best interest. So it is in your best interest to figure out how to vote, how to engage, and how to do this, because rich nations shouldn't have poor people. Let you marinate on that tonight. Thank you, Mr. Storm.
Yep, you're welcome. And just to add my apologies, for going over time. It must have felt like Black Church. The bulletin said it's going to finish at 1, but you know you ain't getting out till 5.
Amen. Amen. I love Black Church, so we're good. Anyway, for those of you that are not new to that expression, God bless you. You'll enjoy it one day. All right, let us depart this evening. Peace. Have a good one. And we will see you next week. Remember, our summer break is coming. So if there is a subject you want us to catch before we break for the summer, and then we have season 5 returning in September, please do send it in quickly so that we can do the research. As you can tell, we don't just come on here with opinions. We have done a lot of reading, a lot of research. So if you have questions, ask them. If there are things you want us to cover within the dark side, do let us know.
Oh, I'm just going to scrub out one topic right now. I am not reading 120 something thousand pages. I know I tend to read reports when, you know, they're a couple of hundred pages. I'm not reading 120,000 pages worth of leaked documents. Ain't happening.
No,
So
we're not
pick
doing that.
something else besides Uber, people.
Something else besides. We covered Uber, right? Y'all do something else. Do your own reading on Uber. All right. Blessings, peace, and we'll see you next time on the dark side. Bye-bye.